Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Forgive us for good afternoon, everyone, and forgive us for the impromptu nature of this. But we just spent the morning trying to wade through some of the details of this and to be sure that we understood what the processes of the law are with regard to this. A statement was issued by the Ministry of Grand Bahama this morning. I was on to the Minister for Grand Bahama, who is Ginger Moxie, and the statement indicates that the government of the Bahamas was advised on the 4th of January 2023 by letter dated the 28th of December 2022 on the most recent termination of 20 employees from the Freeport container port, which is known as FCP, effective the 31st of December 2022. The statement goes on to say, "We are disappointed to learn of the decision made to terminate these team members in the midst of ongoing efforts by the Grand Bahama residents to recover and rebuild their lives from the destruction caused by Hurricane Dorian and the economic downturn brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Prime Minister has been apprised of this issue and has pledged his personal intervention in the matter. The government of the Bahamas is in communication with FCP on this and other matters as we hope to forge ahead to recover and rebuild Grand Bahama Island for the benefit of our people." As you know, I wear several roles, one of which is the chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, and in that capacity I wish to speak to address these issues because, quite frankly, all of us were really shocked by these developments. This city just seemed to be catching a break and on an upward trajectory, and for these developments to happen just seems unfortunate is the way to state it, in a kind of understatement there, but shocking to me. The fact is that this community needs to grow and develop, and it needs all of its commercial entities, all entities, private and public, to pull together for the success and upward movement of this community. And it is really disappointing, these developments. I went through some lengths to go through the timelines here, because the other question is whether or not the Freeport container port actually followed the law in connection with this. And in their letter, which they wrote to the Bahamas government, they rely on an amendment to the Act, which in the Principal Act, Employment Act, is called Section 26BA. And that sets out certain rules for when you want to make people redundant. One of them, as I understand it, is that you're to notify the minister in writing 14 days in advance of any proposed redundancy, laying out the numbers, how many people you intend to lay off, that is, what their names are, what the reason is for the redundancy. And there's also provision in the Act that if you don't follow those rules, particularly as it relates to 20 people or more, there is an additional 30, the law calls for an additional 30 days of pay to be given to an employee where those rules have not been followed. One of the reasons why I spent talking to the Prime Minister and the Minister for Grand Bahama and the Minister of Labor this morning on the call was to find out whether I was reading the law correctly and whether or not we are certain that the container port followed the law in this matter. I would just say to those people who are affected by this, one, to note the Prime Minister's direct interest in this. His view is that the matter should be reversed. It should not have happened, particularly since he reached out a hand to this company and thought that we were partners in Grand Bahama and its forward development. And so this event is simply shocking in the face of it. We must be sure, those who are affected by this, lawyer up and make sure that the rules have been followed at the very least. But be assured that from a political level, we will do all we can to work with the entity itself to see whether or not there is sufficient redress or whether this matter can be reversed. Certainly the most profitable outcome as far as I'm concerned, and the Prime Minister, is that it should be reversed and those people should be put back to work. There does not seem to be any reason for this, particularly since during the pandemic, shipping companies made a fortune a fortune, and you cannot tell me that because you have some reverses in recent times, that makes up for all of the profits that were made during the time of this pandemic. It just comes off as unconscionable and certainly contrary to all the best efforts that everyone is seeking to make to try and have this community succeed. So that I wanted to make that point myself on behalf of the party, and to say to all of our supporters that we're doing our best to try and see what we can do to deal with this situation. So I don't know if you have any questions.
Minister Talia Hall here from Our News. Has government been able to reach out to executives from the Freeport Container Port as yet? And if so, what has their response been like?
The Prime Minister made an attempt this morning to reach out to them, to the international partners on this, and to the local partners. Yesterday, an executive from the container port visited the offices of the Minister of Labor and delivered this news at that time. So, in a sense, they have, on the face of it, it would appear that they've sort of followed the law in giving notice to the minister directly. But if you go forensically through the provisions of the Act, it appears to me that there are some gaps which they've not followed. And so I think, as I said, people ought to lawyer up and make sure that they get everything which they're supposed to get. But this, for me, is more than law. This has to do with equity and fairness of a company that's done well in this country, and at this point should not be making these moves. That's the way I see it.
Okay, another question. We reached out to some of the employees who were actually terminated, and they are under the impression, or have told us, that rumors are swirling that the company are getting rid of the Bahamian employees and applying for work permits to bring in foreigners to replace them. Have you heard anything about that, or what would be your thoughts if that's so?
Yes, what I can say about that is that there is in the swirl, in the public domain, a fair number of complaints about the management of this company and the way Bahamians are treated. This, as you know, is a serial problem for our country. Every time there's investment, investment is good. People make generous profits in this country, but they seem to dislike Bahamians. Can't figure out why that is. So what has happened, we understand, is that the number of work permits has actually increased, not decreased, since they had Bahamian management running the company. So we have to find out why that is. And what you don't want to do, of course, is to be xenophobic, because there may be reasons why you have to bring in expatriate labor. But expatriate labor should match the benefits which are obtained to Bahamians, not at the expense of Bahamians. And that's the situation which all of us will be looking at going forward. But yeah, there have been many complaints which have come to us about the management of the company.
Minister, over my lifespan, we've been having the same complaint with international companies coming into our island, particularly Grand Bahama, and somewhere down the line, firing Bahamians, letting Bahamians go and bringing expats in. What can the government do with the labor laws now to have some impact on that?
Well, the statute law can do some things, but the main issue is whether Bahamians are willing to stand up for themselves. I say often, people say the government is expected to do various things, and that is correct. I mean, we've been elected to do that, but a government is only as strong as the people who are standing behind you. So there is a feeling that if a government is too exercised or energetic with regard to investors coming in and the Bahamian labor content, that those investors will pack up and leave. And that's always what you said, well, you're jeopardizing investment, you're running the investors out. But from a political and ideological point of view, the question is, what good is the investment if it's not actually benefiting Bahamians? Now, if you go back to the Prime Minister's, one of the Prime Minister's first interventions when he came to Grand Bahama after he came to office, he said that he was concerned about this 6-month contract, these 6-month contracts that were being used at the Freeport Container Port, largely using a lacuna in the law to avoid long-term benefits being paid to employees. This has a knock-on effect in the community because if you don't have long-term contracts or long-term benefits, things like going to a bank to get a mortgage, they become impossible. So the benefits are all on the employer's side. Prime Minister said he was dissatisfied. This company promised to solve that problem. So on the face of it, it looked as if they did, but we're advised that at the end of the day, it did not materially change anything. And so we have to go back and microscopically look at this again. But I say law can solve some things, but I think more importantly in this instance will be how much support does the government get in the pushback to this. And my view as a political party is we need to mobilize our supporters to say this is not how you ought to be conducting business in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Denise?
I came in late, so I don't know the gist of what.
Yeah, we're talking about the layoffs at the container port. And I was indicating that Prime Minister is now seeking to intervene. We're really concerned about these layoffs. Don't think that this is the direction this should have gone in. And we're concerned that they may not have followed the law with regard to it.
Yeah, okay, Minister, you said that you're looking, persons are looking into to see if they follow the law. How long do you think that process will take? And then, trying to start a situation going to gain or to garner support of the employees and the Bahamian public to affect change maybe?
Well, it starts from now. I mean, that's the reason why I'm doing this. I wanted to make a distinction between the work of the Ministry of Grand Bahama, which of course is to make the point that as a political organization, we are deeply concerned because I've said this many times, we cannot afford for the city of Freeport to fail. It's too big to fail. And so anything which indicates or causes anything for Freeport not to succeed, we have to be energetic to deal with it. And that's what we want to do. I said at the PM this morning, we have to hop on this straight away. And, I always say this, sometimes all you have is your voice. But if you have your voice and that's all you have, you use your voice. And that's a starting point for us. Now, we also have, because we have the government, we have the levers of the government so that some pressures can be brought to bear to deal with the situation. And so I will certainly be using my influence with my colleagues to say this is something that we ought to look at, should be exercised about, should be energetic about trying to see what we can do, not only to seek redress, but to see if ultimately we can get this company to step back from this.
And last question for me, I know you're currently still going through the investigations to determine whether or not the company broke the law, but what can possibly happen if it is found that they in fact did break the law?
Well, there's a penalty within the law which says that if you did not follow the rules, you have to pay an additional 30 days compensation to the employees. So I say each employee should be sure that if it turns out the rules are not followed, that they should get what they're due. And that's it. And I think, of course, it goes without saying that the social service agencies, national insurance, all of those people will be trying to kick in to help and make sure that there's support for all of the employees. And it's really unfortunate this has happened. The 12th day of Christmas is actually tomorrow, so we're still in the Christmas season. And so in the middle of Christmas, you fire people and tell them to go home. And you wait to let the government know at the last minute, even though you wrote the letter back on the 28th of December, but you didn't deliver the letter until the 4th of January, and then you say, oh, the 20 people have to go. And I think companies also have to be careful that they're not disparaging or defaming the employees in this process, because that's the other thing. You'll start hearing this swirl of rumors going around, oh, well, they didn't show up to work on time, all sorts of things, right? This is not about that. This is about a community that needs growth, that there's a lot of potential for growth here. It's a good place to invest, and this is not a step that's positive.
Are these employees just hirees, or are these long-time employees, or are these just?
They are mainly long-term employees, and mainly at senior levels. So when this happens, you suspect that this is a way of avoiding paying benefits and salaries, cost cutting. That's the way it appears.
And the container port is often looked at as a very sought after career or job in Grand Bahama. What does it say to the young people, especially those that are perhaps just starting out at the container port?
Well, again, that has to be, Tim, the long-term concern, because when Edward St. George and Jack Haywood announced that this container port was coming here, I think people thought the critical mass that Freeport needed to get off the ground commercially had been hit, that this would be the fillip for its forward movement and growth. Instead, it has been a stable employer, but increasingly it's coming off as chinchy, nitpicking, and particularly after stepping back from the hotel, stepping back from the airport. It just appears that we thought these people were our partners in the long-term development of this city. So it causes governments, it causes the people who've invited these investors to come here to think again about the climate into which they've invited investors to come. We want a partnership, and a partnership means that sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's going to be bad, but it's better or worse, richer or poor, sickness or in health, and death to us part. So we're in this together. That's what it's supposed to be. So that's the issue.
Do you think that these big companies and employees, so many Bahamians, they tend to have this sort of attitude above the government, above the law attitude, because they can always hold that card against the government in terms of if they don't get what they want, they can just.
Well, I can only give you this example. Arthur Hanna, when he was, well, you had to say this when he was alive. So Arthur Hanna, who was our former Governor General, former Deputy Prime Minister, told me a story just after the 1967 general election. And there was a hotel union strike in Nassau. Paradise Island, they just cut the bridge, and Paradise Island had just expanded, and Resorts International had just come in. And he said that when the strike took place, Crosby, who was the man who owned Atlantis through the Resorts International, came to him and said, to the government of the day, and said, look, if this strike doesn't end, we're going to close down Paradise Island. And Hanna said, he told him, well, close it down then. And of course, they're not going to close it down. There's too much capital tied up here. And if it comes to that, you find somebody else to buy the capital. That's the way it works. But the criticism of our predecessors was that worked twice, and the hotel closed anyway, and the airport was not repaired anyway. So what's the point if you're threatening me? That's the problem, is that we have to, as Bahamians, appreciate what we actually have. Defending ourselves is often a painful proposition, but defend we must, because this is all we have. They're not going to let me into America. I don't want to live there anyway. So this is what we have, and we have to defend what we have. And as I said, it comes with a price. We are small. I think of talking to a vice president for Carnival Cruise Lines once, and he was telling me that he had just signed off, a vice president of Carnival Cruise Lines had just signed off on the construction of 2 $500 million ships. His one signature. That's 50% of the budget, the annual budget of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. One man just signing off on that. So we are small, right? The question is, because you are small, does that mean that you can be disrespected, stepped on, and worse than that, let people disrespect you and step on you? Well, we know that that can't obtain. We have a right to exist just as everybody has a right to exist. And as I said, the people in the country have to fight for the country they have. Lyndon Bindling said, if you don't fight for what you want, you don't deserve to have it. And that, I think, is the lesson in all of this. So we are the guardians of the ship at the moment, and so we'll be getting on this. I hope that our colleagues on the other political side understand the nature of the battle we're in and will join us in that effort.
Minister, my final question. I'm not as knowledgeable with the work permit issues with companies, particularly industrial companies. How would that work? Are they allowed a certain number of work permits to bring in expats or workers?
It depends on what the heads of agreement says. So each company signs a heads of agreement when they come in, which is an agreement between the Bahamas government and ourselves. Now, I don't know what the specific provisions are of this particular heads of agreement, but I know when we were dealing with Atlantis, Kersner at the time, who owned Atlantis, I think negotiated 150 work permits. Now, these companies often say, because you say 150 work permits, that means that they can just apply and any work permit they want, they get. My view was you still have to go through the test of whether or not there's a Bahamian who's available to do that job. That's me. I don't know what the current position is, but that's me. But the company's entitled to it. I don't think there's any entitlement. I think there's still a test which has to be done. Is there someone available in the local market that can do the job? If you fail that test, that is, there is no one, then certainly the next result ought to be work permit. All right. All right. Thank you very much for coming at such short notice.